2024, Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Cornel West is heading to Detroit. The third-party candidate is planning to visit Detroit to support workers in the United Auto Workers strike. West told The Hill yesterday he plans to go to Michigan to support those advocating for higher wages and a check on CEO profits, The Hill writes. When asked in a text message if he plans to visit Detroit, West replied, "Yes, indeed!" exclamation points.
Meanwhile, Hollywood studios say writers are inching closer to an agreement to end the industry-wide strike, hoping to finalize a deal today, according to sources close to the negotiations. Joining us now to discuss is host of the Sabby Sabs podcast, Sabrina Salvati. Sabby, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me on.
I mean, Sabby, I hope I can be a friend of you because I love Sabby, guys. We got to sort of break bread before we went live, and I'm loving it. Sabby, let me ask you about this because I was just listening to Steve Harvey's radio program a couple of days ago, and he spoke a little bit about the writers' strike. And he made a very interesting point. He said it's not just the writers that are being impacted by this. It's the showrunners. It's the camera guys. There's so many other different layers and components that we're not necessarily talking about. And many of those guys aren't a part of a union. Can you talk a little bit about the impact on those groups of workers?
Right. So I think a lot of times when people think about the movies or TV shows, they're not really thinking about the people in the background, the production crew. And without the production crew, the shows don't run, movies don't run. You really cannot do anything without them in the entertainment industry. And I think they're also undervalued. They're also underpaid. And I've heard about this for quite some time. I think that a lot of people also have this assumption that a lot of actors in Hollywood are rich or are millionaires. Most of the actors in Hollywood are working class people. They have a regular job. Some of them wait tables. Waitressing is really popular there. And they do acting on the side. They're trying to build up their resume. But a lot of those actors are not millionaires. They're not like a Susan Sarandon, so to speak. So I think that people have to understand that these people in the entertainment industry have been underpaid and undervalued for quite some time. The production crew in particular, I believe it was about 2 years ago, they were threatening to go on strike because they were working long hours, getting few hours of sleep, driving home at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then have to be back at the set like 3 or 4 hours later. I think this is just something that a lot of people are not aware of if they haven't worked in the entertainment industry or they don't know someone who works in that field. But those people are definitely undervalued, and you cannot have these TV shows or movies without them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to piggyback off of that point, it does seem like there's been a lot of solidarity across both different segments of, say, Hollywood and across entirely different sectors of the economy. I know there's been some solidaristic actions informally between the auto worker strikers and the SAG writer strikers and then the actors there. Do you think that this is reflective of a broader insurgence of union and labor activity? And if so, what does that mean for Joe Biden, who is currently under pressure from some to go and join Cornel West on the picket line, but receiving pushback from others in his party who are saying this is a slippery slope and the Democratic Party shouldn't commit itself too much to the interests of labor. God forbid it be beholden in any real and serious way to the interests of working people in the United States.
I think it's a big mistake for Joe Biden to ignore the workers that are on strike. We are experiencing the hot labor summer, so to speak. There's been a lot of organizations that have gone on strike, but we've been seeing these strikes pop up for the past year and a half. And now you see Cornel West, you're seeing the activist side of Cornel West come out. So he is known for standing in solidarity with the workers. He's been on the front lines for decades, fighting for workers and marginalized groups in this country. So this is now the movement piece of his campaign that he was speaking about. And it's not just the UAW strike. He hosted a webinar in reference to Stop Cop City. He was just at the climate march in New York City. And he's also going to be the keynote speaker at Peace in Ukraine event in D.C. on October 3rd. So I'll actually be there covering that live. I think that it's important that we see these movements pop up across the country. And this is something I've been hoping would happen for a long time. I was hoping that other unions would come together in solidarity and stand with each other. And I've already seen that happen in the UK, where the nurses and the teachers and the railroad workers decided to stand in solidarity with each other last year. So this is good news, I think, so to speak. I mean, workers in this country deserve a living wage. And from what I've seen, especially with the UAW workers, a lot of them are underpaid and overworked. So this really does speak volumes. But I do think it's a mistake for Joe Biden not to be present.
Sorry, but this is interesting because former President Donald Trump is skipping the next Republican debate moderated by Fox News, and he's actually going to meet with UAW workers and strikers. What do you think the implications are of that on the 2024 presidential contest?
Donald Trump knows how to read the room. I may not agree with his policies, but he knows how to pay attention to what people are saying and what people want. So he's responding to that, so to speak. I think that actually speaks louder than going to the debate, to be honest with you. I think at this point, Donald Trump feels like he doesn't really have to be there anyway because he is leading so high in the polls. But I think it's a mistake for any presidential candidate at this point in time to ignore these labor strikes, to ignore the workers. I just saw a piece recently where Tim Scott said that the workers should be fired for going on strike. You cannot speak against the working class people in this country and expect them to come out and support you when you're when 2024 comes around in November. I think that it's a big mistake. Every candidate right now on the campaign trail should be present at these labor strikes, and they should be standing in solidarity with the workers.
Yeah, I love a world where conservatives and Republicans are fighting for the votes of the labor class. But there is this weird tension that's arising now because I think you're right. Donald Trump knows how to read the room. And back in 2016 was making a lot of sympathetic statements to labor as he was criticizing various trade deals that send American jobs overseas. But now he has to contend with his own record. And as president, and I'm reading a report from TNR, Trump dismantled health and safety protections for labor rights for workers and slashed taxes for corporations and the rich, which has been a focus of so many of the UAW workers' concerns that the management, that CEOs have gotten a 40% pay raise while workers are earning less for in inflation-adjusted dollars than they were 15, 20 years ago. He admitted in a televised primary debate that he thought that wages were too high. I mean, when you look at his actual statements, he's to the right of even Sean Hannity, who pushed back against Tim Scott when he said that he thought the wages were too high. So how do you think that Trump is going to be able to negotiate all of his past statements that have been pretty anti-labor with his presence on the, if not really on the picket line, but in Detroit during the debate?
Knowing Donald Trump, he'll try to spin it in some way, shape, or form. He'll probably say, "Did I say that? I don't think I said that." That's
He's going to Urkel it, huh?
Like, no, just knowing Donald Trump. And I saw his interview recently with Megyn Kelly, and he was doing that towards her. When there were some things that she called out about his presidency, and he was like, "I don't think I don't know. I really said that." He'll try to find some way to spin it. But you're right. Like, people do pay attention to your actions, not just your words. I think right now the country is so divided that they are just begging for someone to speak for the working class people. Now, I would hope that voice would come from, Dr. West, because his record holds firm in reference to fighting for working class people. But I think people are going to see through that in reference to Donald Trump. But at the same time, the workers who are there will remember that he appeared, just like people in East Palestine, Ohio, remember that Donald Trump was there and that Joe Biden was not.
Sabby, that's a really, really good point, which brings me to President Biden and Dr. West. I mean, at some point, the Biden administration, the Biden presidential campaign, they're going to have to acknowledge that Cornel West is running for president. And he is speaking the language of a lot of hardworking Americans, Sabby, of every ethnicity, of every religious background. They've tried to avoid it, not acknowledge it. But I think him showing up to these types of events does speak to something is sort of percolating across this country right now, which is, as you said, the working class people have had enough. Do you see at a point where Biden will address this? Do you see a point where maybe the vice president will address this? Or do you think they just ignore it altogether?
I don't think Joe Biden's going to say anything, just like he hasn't said anything about East Palestine, Ohio. He hasn't visited those people. I think they're trying to prevent Joe Biden from speaking as much as possible, to be honest with you. I think that's another reason why we don't see his presence as much. But I will say, again, like, this just goes to show to the Democratic Party, this is what happens when you push a candidate on people that the American people, for the most part, did not want. If we go back to the polls in 2020, it was obvious that Bernie Sanders was the most popular candidate. But of course, the DNC did not want Bernie Sanders. He was not a part of that status quo, so to speak. So, of course, they played games behind the scenes to convince other candidates to drop out of that race. Obama made a couple of phone calls to get people to drop out. Jim Clyburn rallied people in South Carolina and said, we're going to support Joe Biden. And everything changed after that. But Joe Biden didn't really have a strong, solid base to begin with. And that's why we're at this point right now. So hopefully this is a lesson to the DNC. But who knows? I think they'll continue to fundraise. That's for sure. Even if they lose, they still win if they fundraise.
Sabrina Salvati, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.